In the red booth, a quiet man watched the waitress hold a coffee pot with shaking hands. They thought she was only part of the furniture. But when a place tries to erase someone, what truth is waiting to be spoken? Harper knew the man in booth 3 was short $2 before he reached for his wallet. She saw it in the way his fingers slowed over the cracked leather, in the tired little breath he let out when he counted the bills twice. He was a long-haul driver, with rain on his shoulders and red in his eyes, the kind of man who drank coffee like it was the only thing keeping him stitched together. He ordered eggs over easy toast and sausage every Tuesday night when his route carried him through that stretch of Tennessee, and he always left a quarter under the saucer if he had one. That night, he did not have one. Harper slid the check face down beside his plate and tapped it once with her pencil. "Pay me next time," she said. He looked up, ashamed. "Harper, I already owe from last week, I know." She wrote a small mark in the old ledger tucked under her arm. "That's why I used pencil." The man gave her a tired smile, the kind that did not quite make it all the way up to the eyes. Around them, the diner hummed in its usual midnight way. A nurse in pale scrubs sat at the counter with both hands wrapped around a mug. Two road workers shared a plate of fries near the window. Rain ticked against the glass, soft and steady, and the sign above the door buzzed like it had been threatening to die for years. Harper moved through it all like she belonged to the place as much as the coffee pots and red vinyl stools did. She knew who wanted hot sauce without asking. She knew which drivers took cream and which ones said they took it black, but always softened it at the last second. She knew which tired women from the late shift wanted silence, and which ones needed someone to say, "Rough night?" so they could finally let their shoulders drop. The diner did not belong to Harper. She reminded herself of that more often lately, though never when she was wiping down the counter or counting tips or locking the back door before sunrise. It belonged to Darlene Morrow, who had run it with a stiff back, a sharp tongue, and a heart too soft for her own good. Darlene was in the hospital now, and every hour she was gone made the place feel a little less protected. Harper tried not to think about that. She kept working. At 1:45, she refilled the nurse's coffee and wrote, "Half soup, no charge," beside another name in Darlene's ledger. The book was thick, bent at the corners, and full of pencil marks that only Harper and Darlene could truly read. Some pages had amounts, some held initials, some held little notes like, "Allergic to onions," or "Payday Friday," or "Lost wallet, don't ask." To anyone else, it would have looked like a mess. To Harper, it was a map of who had needed kindness and who had promised in their own time to return it. She had just tucked the ledger back beneath the counter when the bell over the door gave a hard, bright jangle. Preston Morrow stepped in as if the rain had personally offended him. He did not shake water from his coat or glance around like a son visiting his mother's diner. He came in carrying a flat folder under one arm and a set of keys in his hand. His face had the pale, pinched look of a man who had not slept well and had decided to make that everyone else's problem. "Harper," he said. The way he said her name made the nurse at the counter look down into her cup. Harper wiped her hands on her apron. "Preston, I didn't know you were coming by tonight. Has there been any change with Darlene?" "My mother is stable." He did not soften when he said it. "That's not why I'm here." The driver in booth 3 lowered his fork. Harper felt the room notice the shift before anyone said a word. The diner was still warm, still smelling of coffee and bacon grease. But something cold had come through the door with Preston and settled over the counter. He placed the folder beside the register. "Not on the customer side. On Harper's side. I need you to read this," he said. "Or don't. It doesn't change anything." Harper looked at the folder before she touched it. She had handled supplier bills, late notices, tax envelopes, medical papers Darlene had pretended were not serious. She knew the weight of bad paper. "What is it?" "A sale agreement." The words were quiet, but they landed hard. "For what?" Harper asked, though she already knew. "For this property. The diner, the lot, the outbuilding, everything attached to it." Preston glanced around, his mouth tightening as if the place embarrassed him. A regional travel stop company made an offer. A good one. Better than this place has any right to pull in. The nurse set her mug down carefully. Harper did not move. Her fingers were still resting on the edge of the counter, close to Darlene's ledger. You can't sell it while Darlene's in the hospital. I can act on her behalf for practical matters. She wouldn't want this. Preston's eyes snapped back to her. My mother also wouldn't want to drown in bills because she kept feeding grown people who couldn't pay for eggs. A silence followed that. Not empty silence, the kind full of people pretending not to listen. Harper felt heat rise into her face, but she kept her voice low. Those people kept this place alive. No, Preston said. They kept her busy. There's a difference. He opened the folder and turned a page toward her. She saw blocks of text, a signature line, legal language packed tight enough to make her throat close. He tapped one paragraph with 2 fingers. You have 1 week, Harper blinked. 1 week for what? To clear out anything that belongs to you. Personal items, notes, whatever you keep in the back. After that, transition management takes over. The driver in booth 3 pushed his plate away. Now hold on. Preston turned his head just enough to stop him. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. This is a private business matter. Harper hated that sentence. Private business matter. As if the woman at the counter had not eaten there after double shifts. As if men had not come in, soaked and shaking, and left with food in their stomachs. As if Darlene had not given half her life to no one walked back into the rain hungry just because their wallet was empty. But Harper did not own the walls. She did not own the grill. She did not own the sign, the stools, the cracked sugar jars, or the back office where Darlene kept extra pencils, because ink made debts feel too final. All she had was her apron, her hands, and the ledger under the counter. So she swallowed what wanted to break out of her and said, I'll keep the diner running until Darlene tells me different. Preston gave a short, humorless breath. That's the problem, Harper. You keep acting like loyalty is the same as ownership. The words struck deeper than he could have known. Maybe because part of her had always feared they were true. Before she could answer, the bell over the door rang again. This time, Harper looked up too fast. A man stepped inside with rain on his dark jacket, and a smile that belonged nowhere near that hour of the night. Ray Maddox stood just inside the doorway, clean-shaven, polished, and pleased with himself, as if he had arrived exactly when the room was weakest. For 1 second, Harper's hand tightened around the edge of Darlene's ledger. Ray's eyes found hers, then dropped to her apron before coming back up with that old, familiar tilt of his mouth. Preston picked up the keys and held them out. Ray will be handling the transition, he said. You two already know each other, so that should make this easier. And just like that, the diner Harper had held together through rain, hospital calls, and unpaid meals no longer felt like home. It felt like a place someone had already started taking apart while she was still standing inside it. Ray took the keys from Preston, like he had been waiting his whole life to do it in front of her. He turned them once in Tatcheringer, slow enough for the little ring of metal to catch the light above the register. Harper stood on the other side of the counter with Darlene's ledger close to her hip, the old pencil still tucked between the pages. She could feel every eye in the diner trying not to look. Well, Ray said, letting his gaze travel over the coffee station, the stools, the pie case, and finally Harper's apron. I guess some things really don't change. Harper kept her hand flat on the counter. There are customers here, that's what I mean. He smiled as if he had said something harmless. Same counter, same night shift, same little book of sad stories. His eyes dropped to the ledger. You always were good at making people feel sorry for you. The nurse at the counter looked up sharply. One of the drivers shifted in his booth. Harper heard the rain harder against the front windows, as if the whole parking lot had gone quiet just to listen. Ray, she said, careful and low, this is still Darlene's diner tonight. You don't have to do this in front of people. His smile thinned. Do what? Manage the transition? That's my job now. The word manage pressed into her like a thumb on a bruise. She had once believed Ray liked that she worked hard. Back then he had told her she was sweet, steady, the kind of woman a man could come home to. Then steady became small, sweet became simple. And before long, every kind thing about her had been turned into proof. She would never rise any higher than a night shift and a name tag. He leaned one elbow on the counter. You know, Harper, I told Preston not to worry. You're not difficult. You just need time to accept things. A soft scrape came from booth 3. The driver had pushed back his plate. Harper turned to him first, because it was easier to serve someone else's discomfort than stand inside her own. She reached for the coffee pot, though no one had asked for a refill. Her fingers closed around the warm handle, and she lifted it because holding something gave her hands a reason not to shake. Ray noticed anyway. There it is, he said softly. That look, like the world owes you a place because you remembered how somebody takes their eggs. The words did not raise his voice. That made them worse. They slid across the counter and landed where he knew they would. Harper stood with the coffee pot in her hand, her face warm, her throat tight. Behind her, the old clock ticked toward closing. In front of her, the diner that had always felt a shelter suddenly felt like a stage. Then, from the last booth by the rain-streaked window, a newspaper folded once. Colum Price had been there the whole time. Harper had noticed him earlier in the night the way she always noticed him. Quietly. He came in alone, sat in the red booth near the corner, ordered pecan pie and coffee, and never asked for more than he needed. Outside the glass, under the weak parking lot lights, several big black SUVs sat dark and still in the rain. Harper had assumed they belonged to passing travelers. Now, with Callum's eyes lifted over the top of his folded paper, she was not so sure. He did not look at Ray first. He looked at Harper, not at the apron, not at the shape of her body, not at the coffee pot trembling just enough to betray her. He looked at her face as if the important thing in the room was what she would do next. Miss Ellis, he said, his voice calm enough to lower the temperature of the whole diner. Would you mind warming my coffee? Ray gave a short laugh. She's a little busy being dramatic. Callum's eyes moved to him then. Only for a second, I asked her. The diner went still. Harper crossed to the booth because it gave her somewhere to go. She poured his coffee carefully, grateful when the stream did not spill. A wedge of pecan pie sat untouched on his plate. His paper was folded beside it, squared neatly with the edge of the table. You heard, she said, barely above the sound of rain. I heard enough. I'm sorry. For what? She didn't have an answer that made sense. For being embarrassed. For being talked about. For letting an old wound show in public. For standing in a room full of people who knew her kindness and still feeling like Ray's version of her might be the one they believed. Colum nodded toward the counter where the ledger rested. That book Darlene keeps. You understand it? I'm the only one besides her who does. Good. He took a business card from inside his coat and placed it beside the pie plate. I need a temporary kitchen coordinator for my drivers. 10 days. Overnight work, meals, coffee, simple ordering, receipts kept clean. I can pay through a service agreement. Harper blinked. I don't understand. You need a legal reason to be in this diner after hours, while the transition is being argued over. His voice stayed even. I need my drivers fed. Those two needs can sit at the same table. She looked toward the black SUVs outside, then back at him. Who are you? A man with trucks on the road and a long memory for places that treat them well. It was not a full answer. Somehow, it was enough to make her heart beat differently. Ray called from the counter, Harper, don't let some customer fill your head. This place is already sold. Callum did not turn around. Not everything with a folder on it is finished. Harper held the coffee pot between both hands now. Hope was too large a word for what moved through her. It was smaller than that. A match struck in a cold room. Dangerous because it could go out. Dangerous because it made her want to protect it. I can't fight paperwork, she said. No, Callum said. But you can read what people forgot they wrote down. That was how, after the last customer left, and Ray finally walked out with the keys he wanted everyone to see, Harper stayed, not openly, not boldly. She stayed with a signed service request on the counter, a fresh pot of coffee cooling beside the register, and Darlene's ledger spread open under the yellow light in the back. At first, the pages were what they had always been. Names, amounts, initials. A man who owed for meatloaf, a nurse who paid double after payday, a driver who covered breakfast for a other driver headed home with bad news. Harper turned each page slowly, hearing Darlene's voice in every pencil mark. Then she saw something she had never understood before. Beside a list of names, Darlene had written Roof Fund in her tight, stubborn hand. Under it were signatures, not one or two, lines of them, some with dollar amounts, some with dates written only as seasons. Farther back, another page said cooler repair, then another, tax help, then another. Paid back in full by the road. Harper stopped breathing for a moment. She bent closer, tracing the lines without touching them too hard. These were not debts, not exactly. They were contributions, promises, proof that the diner had not survived on Darlene's mercy alone. It had been held up, board by board and bill by people everyone else passed on the highway, without seeing column stood across the small table sluss. Harper looked down at the book that had always felt like a burden and saw, for the first time, a history. "Oh, my lord," she whispered. The pencil marks blurred at the edges, but she did not look away. Darlene's ledger was not just a record of who had owed the diner. It might be the only thing left that could prove the diner owed them all. By dawn, the ledger had become heavier than any stack of legal papers Preston could lay on the counter. Harper and Callum sat at the small table in the back room with coffee gone cold between them, turning pages under the yellow light. Every time Harper found another note in Darlene's tight handwriting, she felt the shape of the diner change in her mind. It was no longer just a rented building with red stools and a tired grill. It was a place people had held together with $5 bills, late-night repairs, and signatures written after long shifts on the road. Colum Kellett's voice low. "We need to match names to people who can still speak for them." Harper nodded, already pulling a clean sheet from the order pad. Earl Dobbs. He always got the turkey plate with extra gravy. Ran south every other Thursday. Darlene marked him for the roof fund. She wrote his name carefully, another page. Another name, Marcy from the night bus, Harper said. She wasn't a driver, but she paid toward the cooler repair. She used to sit by the pie case because she said it was the warmest spot in the place. Callum watched her write. "You remember all of them like that?" Harper almost said no. It felt too large, too proud. But the names were coming faster now, each one attached to a face, a plate, a tired joke, a bad week, a promise to pay when the route came back through. "I remember what people need," she said. For the first time since Preston had set that folder on the counter, the words did not feel small. Then Callum reached for the next section of the ledger and stopped, the spine bent wrong. Harper saw his hand pause before she understood why. Several pages near the middle had been torn out cleanly, close to the binding, not ripped in anger, removed carefully, deliberately. The little paper stubs left behind were pale against the older, grease-softened pages. Her pencil rolled off the table and hit the floor. "No," she whispered. Colum did not touch the torn edges at first. He leaned closer, his face going still in a way that made the room feel colder. "What was in this part?" he asked. Harper swallowed. If the order stayed the same, that would have been the tax help pages. Maybe the back cooler. Maybe the second roof patch. She pressed her fingers against the table to steady them. Those were the biggest ones. The hope she had been guarding all night thinned at the edges. A ledger with missing pages looked desperate. A story with holes looked easy to dismiss. Preston would call it sentimental nonsense. Ray would smile that sharp little smile and say she had made more out of an old book than it ever was. Ray, the thought came slowly. Then all at once, he had the keys. Harper said. Callum looked at her, after Preston handed them over. Ray had the office keys. He came back after closing to check inventory. He said it was part of transition. Her stomach tightened as she heard her own words. "I left him alone back here for maybe 10 minutes. Callum's jaw shifted, but he did not raise his voice. "Then we stopped treating the book like the whole case." Harper looked at the torn pages. "What else do we have?" "You," he said. "And whoever remembers signing." The phone on the wall rang before she could answer. Harper picked it up, expecting a supplier or another customer asking whether breakfast would still be served. Preston's voice came through instead, clipped and brisk. "The public walkthrough is this evening," he said. "The company wants photographs before the handoff. Keep the front clean, no clutter." No old papers on the counters. Harper stared at the torn ledger. "This evening," she said. "You told me there was a week. I told you to clear out within a week. The buyer has a schedule. Try to make this harder than it needs to be." The line clicked dead. For a moment, Harper simply held the receiver in her hand. Colum reached for his coat. "How many names can you give me by breakfast?" Her fear did not vanish. It changed shape. It became something with edges, as many as my hand can write. The day moved faster than any day the diner had ever seen. Callum made calls from the far booth, his voice quiet, his words short. Harper worked between the counter and the back table, writing names, routes, food orders, little identifying pieces no official form would ever ask for. Sausage biscuit, no egg. Black coffee, 3 sugars. Paid for a stranger's soup, slept in the lot during the ice week. Signed under cooler repair after Darlene fed his whole crew. By noon, the first driver called back. By 2, another came in person, cap in hand, saying he had not known Darlene was in the hospital and asking where to stand if Harper needed him. By late afternoon, big rigs and pickups began appearing at the edge of the lot. Men and women, who looked like they had been pulled from every mile of road in the county, came through the rain-bright parking lot, some embarrassed, some angry, some holding old receipts folded in wallets. Harper recognized them before they reached the door. "You ran Memphis to Knoxville's," she told one woman before the woman could say her name. "You hated onions. Darlene always packed your pie separate so it wouldn't get warm." The woman's eyes filled. "I signed for the cooler." Callum stood near the entrance, not commanding, not threatening, just making room. He wrote down what people said and sent them toward Harper when memory was needed. It was his network that found them, but it was Harper's memory that brought them all the way back. Near sunset, Preston arrived with Ray and 3 people from the travel stop company. They had brought a printed banner about bringing new life to an old roadside stop. Someone had placed a little ribbon near the register. Ray wore a clean shirt and a satisfied look until he saw the parking lot. "What is this?" he asked. Preston's face tightened. "Harper, I told you to keep the front clean." "It is clean," she said. The company people looked around, uncertain now. The diner was full, but not with customers waiting for pancakes. Drivers stood along the counter. A nurse from the night shift leaned near the pie case. Men with weathered hands held caps against their chests. Women with road maps folded in their purses watched Preston like they had finally found the man trying to erase their names. Ray stepped close enough to lower his voice. "You don't know what you're doing?" Harper felt the old shame reach for her. It was still there. It knew her by heart. Then she looked at the ledger in her hands, at the torn stubs along the spine, and at the people who had come because she remembered them. "Yes," she said, "I do." She walked through the kitchen door because the front aisle was crowded, past the grill, where Darlene had fed people who could not pay, and came out from behind the counter with the ledger held against her chest. The room-quieted Colum stood behind her, not in front. Behind him stood the drivers whose names had survived in pencil in memory and in their own tired voices. Harper opened the ledger to the first torn section and looked straight at Preston, then at Ray. "This diner was never just yours to sell," she said, "and these people came back to prove it." The room did not answer Harper right away. For a few long seconds, the diner held its breath. Preston stood near the register, with the company folder still under his arm, his mouth pressed into a hard line. Ray looked from the torn ledger to the drivers behind Harper, then toward the people from the travel stop company, as if one of them might rescue him from the silence. No one did. One of the company representatives stepped back from the ribbon by the counter. "Mr. Morrow," she said carefully, "you told us there were no community claims attached to this property." Preston's face tightened. "There aren't. This is sentimental noise." A woman in a rain jacket lifted her hand. "I signed that book when we paid for the roof." A driver near the pie case said, "I helped with the cooler." Another voice followed. Then another. Harper kept both hands on the ledger. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. For the first time since Preston had walked in with that sale folder, she was not standing alone against paper. The room itself had become an answer. column stayed behind her, exactly where he had placed himself. Not in front, not taking over, just close enough that she knew he would not let the moment collapse under pressure. Ray tried to laugh. Come on. An old notebook doesn't make them owners. No, Callum said, but tearing pages from it does make people ask why. Ray's smile disappeared. Harper looked at him then. Not like the woman he had embarrassed by the counter. Not like the night shift girl he thought he could shrink with a nickname and a smirk. She looked at him as someone who had finally seen the shape of what he was afraid of. You had the office keys, she said. You were back there alone. The company people looked at Ray. Preston looked at Ray too, and that was the moment Ray understood he had become inconvenient. I was doing inventory, Ray said. Harper opened the ledger to the torn section and laid it on the counter where everyone could see the pale stubs of missing paper. Then you won't mind explaining why the pages with large contributions are gone. Ray said nothing. By the end of that evening, the ribbon had been taken down. The company representatives left through the front door without shaking Preston's hand. The drivers remained until the parking lot emptied of strangers. Some signed statements. Some left phone numbers. Some simply stood beside Harper while the rain slowed to a fine mist over the trucks outside. Preston did not apologize. Men like him often mistook apology for surrender. He gathered his folder with stiff, angry hands and said there would be lawyers, that none of this was finished, that people could not run a business on memories. Harper was too tired to argue. Then we'll do it with paperwork, she said. The next morning, Darlene was sitting up in her hospital bed with a blanket over her knees and a look on her face that warned everyone she was still herself. Her hair was thinner than Harper remembered, her voice rougher, but when Harper placed the ledger on the small table beside her, Darlene rested one hand on it like she had been waiting for it to come back. You found the roof pages? Darlene asked. Some of them, Harper said. Some were missing. Darlene's mouth hardened. I knew that boy would try something. Preston stood near the wall, pale and silent. Ray was not there. No one had invited him. A local lawyer sat with a neat folder in his lap, explaining everything slowly enough that Darlene could stop him whenever she wanted. The sale could not move forward cleanly now. The community claims, the witness statements, the missing pages, and Darlene's own confirmation made the quick transfer impossible. If Preston wanted a fight, he would not be fighting one waitress. He would be fighting the woman who owned the diner, the people who helped keep it alive, and a record he had hoped would stay buried in a back room. Darlene listened without blinking. Then she looked at Harper. You kept the place open? Harper nodded. Best I could. You fed them? When they came in, you wrote it down? Harper's throat tightened. In pencil, a small sound escaped Darlene. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Good girl. The papers took time, but not the kind of time that leaves people helpless. They took signatures, witnesses, corrected pages, and Darlene's stubborn insistence that the diner had never been meant for a quick sale. Preston lost the right to move the property without challenge. The travel stop company withdrew completely. Ray's new position vanished before it had truly begun, and with the statements about the missing pages, he found himself answering questions he could not charm his way around. Preston came once more, weeks later, to collect what little belonged to him from the office. He did not meet Harper's eyes. Whatever money he had hoped to solve his problems with was gone now, and so was the power he had carried into the diner like a set of keys. The day Darlene signed the final cooperative papers, Harper stood beside her with both hands folded tightly in front of her apron. The lawyer slid the last page forward. Darlene signed slowly, each letter careful and firm. Then she took the diner key from her purse. It was old, brass-colored, and worn smooth at the top, from decades of being held by tired hands. I don't want you running this place like you owe anybody for letting you stay, Darlene said. Harper looked down at the key. Darlene pressed it into her palm. Run it, because you know who belongs here. That was the moment Harper finally believed it. Not all at once, not in some grand burst of victory. It settled quietly, like the first warm light over the counter after a long night. She had not been saved by a rich man or an old book or a room full of witnesses. They had helped. They had stood with her. But she had been the one who remembered. The diner reopened the following night. No ribbon, no banner, no speech. Just coffee, eggs, pie, and the old ledger back under the counter, still written in pencil where pencil was kinder. The drivers came in one by one. The nurse took her usual stool. Callum sat in the last booth with pecan pie he let grow cool, while Harper worked the room. Near closing, she brought him fresh coffee. "You don't have to keep coming," she said. "I know." She waited. He looked toward the window, where the parking lot lights reflected on the wet pavement. "That's why I do." Harper smiled, small but real, and slipped the brass key into the pocket of her apron. The sign above the door buzzed softly against the night, stubborn and bright. And this time, when she turned the lock, it was not to keep the world out. It was to make sure there would be a light waiting when the road brought people home.